comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Welcome to the Free Money Podcast, Season 2. Holy shit. It's the Brooklyn Bay Area consensus about institutional investing and, I guess, coping.
That's the theme for Season 6, Sloan.
Yeah,
Surviving, how to survive quarantine. That's the theme.
Yeah, like literally, I go into like Zoom therapy sessions and have just screamed in every single one of them.
Yeah. I am really sick of people taking phone calls and turning them into Zooms. Like, I have this new hierarchy of things I hate. I used to hate phone calls that were random. I wanted you to email me or text me, preferable email. And now people are like, dude, let's get a Zoom call and let's all stare at each other at 8 a.m. instead of, just sending each other an email. I feel like we're doing too much Zoom. Yeah.
It is a little bit overshooting, but at the same time, like any social contact is pretty sweet.
Well, there is that. Yeah. And I do a lot of hanging out with my dog and children. And that's, yeah.
Thank God for roommates.
I am eating a lot more celery. I put a stick in every time I drink a Bloody Mary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a couple of sticks a day just before this podcast. No, just you see me eating celery, you'll know what's going on.
Well, you've got one of those like those football like helmets with the beer cans on the side, but with bloodies.
Yeah. It is amazing though. Like just for the sake of the listeners. I mean, we were just talking before the show. I'm into my 60s in terms of days in quarantine. Sloan, you're in your 40s or 50s? What did you say?
Today is day 49. I take off, every passing day.
That's a long time. It's unreal.
It is. It really, and like we're in parts of the country where, you're kind of short creature comforts and like long proximity to other interesting things, I live in a converted warehouse, right? And like there's tons of light, thank God, but there's not there's lots of like great nightlife around here usually. And that's why one would live here. Yeah. So the adjustment in New York City is super stark for that reason, I think.
And I feel like New York, I lived in New York for, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 years when I was younger. And it strikes me, you have to get into elevators. Like so much of life is still not socially distanced. I'm curious, like, first off, how do you get
my sister?
I think we had a delay there. Go for it.
Oh yeah. But yeah, my sister like works managing construction sites, and like they were just sort of operating as normally until very recently.
Wow. But like when you're in a building like this, how do you bring food into the building? Like what's your strategy?
It's very like I drive down to Fairway once a week, and I buy about $100 for the groceries.
All right,
and that's it.
That's it. That's pretty legit. I feel like we're in the like food delivery world where we're trying to get that big behemoth company to find a delivery slot. And I'm not going to give them a plug here, son. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I refuse.
I mean, today the workers are striking. I guess we can give them a plug. It's May Day, So a lot of the gig economy workers at Instacart and Amazon and Trader Joe's and stuff like that are on strike for better protective equipment and combat pay and stuff like that right now.
Man, that is hard. I mean, that's a tough job. They're just going out there and keeping people alive. I mean, it's interesting how, like the social distancing has been facilitated by this massive tech eruption over the last 5 years with like DoorDash, Amazon, Instacart, Zoom. Like for a lot of people, at least here in Silicon Valley, I bet you life is pretty normal for a lot of people in like the service industries. Whereas in other parts of the country, like where you have to like actually go build things, not just software, it's much more challenging. I mean, that's a huge generalization, but I'm trying to figure out why our death rates here are so low now as compared to some other places.
Well, I think that, y'all took it seriously early on.
Yeah.
Like here our mayor clowned around for like a solid week about whether or not to shut stuff down. and we're still playing catch up. For like literally about 2.5 or 3 weeks, anytime I turned off The Sopranos or whatever I was binging, you could hear a siren constantly.
Yeah, that's emotional wear and tear that I think we've been spared. That constant sound in the background of people being very sick.
It's just, and like I got COVID. I wasn't confirmed, but I got COVID symptoms, and it was the sickest I've been in years. I went from I spent the whole winter skiing a ton, and like I had skied 30,000 vertical feet a month before, and then like I get this COVID, and standing up feels like I just sprinted up a flight of stairs.
Dang.
Yeah.
Dang. Real live veteran of the COVID right here.
Yeah. I think that everyone in New York pretty much has had it, whether or not they recognize that.
That's true. There's a bunch of the people with antibodies, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope.
So what's going on with the stock market, Sloan? Why are stocks so high right now?
Maybe they're actually high. Maybe like people that legal pot is taking off.
That's the best explanation I've heard, because it's like we're back in October we're at the levels it was in October 2019. Now it was off a little bit today, but off the highs. It's only 13% off the highs. And it just seems totally irrational. But
I don't really advise moving around your stocks all that much, but like selling stocks feels like kind of a no-brainer here, because I just sort of, I feel like a lot of traders are sort of thinking like, okay, well, this Resmetirom drug is going to work 100% of the time. This pandemic is going to be over in 12 to 18 months. It's going to be mostly business as usual this summer. And like even a small change from that rosy forecast seems like it would be pretty bad news to a lot of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Seems like we've been like on the upside. The markets have been going up because maybe the numbers around the COVID crisis weren't quite as bad. Like we're not at 2 million deaths. We're at 60,000 deaths.
We only lost as many people as we did in the peak year of the AIDS crisis and the entire Vietnam War. But like, let's see if we can get like a better take, because like we're not doctors, like
Yeah.
Let's call our.
Should we do a phone a friend?
Yeah, let's do our phone a friend. Because
let's do it.
Because your friend Ben apparently knows stuff about this, right?
My friend Ben, maybe the first thing we'll ask him to do is introduce himself. But he is a pandemic modeler, and that's why we set him up to come on the program today and tell us exactly how much bleach we should be drinking.
Yeah, and like, do you mix your bleach with other
vodka
stuff, right?
or portable alpha? Ben, hey,
how
hey
are
Ben,
you?
We're great. We're just calling. This is Ashby and Sloan. We're calling from the Free Money Podcast.
Yeah, and we were wondering if you had any good bleach cocktail recipes.
Experimenting every day, getting a little better.
Ben, maybe what we could do is have you give like 1 minute, just for your background. I already given you some. Our listeners are just the smartest people in finance on the planet, and many of them are just incredible at generating alpha around different crises. And so we thought you could give a sense for what's going on. But before you do that, tell us who you are and where you're working.
I am first delighted to join you guys. I'm Ben Oppenheim. I work at Metabiota. Metabiota is an epidemic risk analytic company. So we focus on modeling and monitoring and building data and analytic tools for this pandemic thing, which used to be a kind of quiet, scientifically interesting corner of the world that didn't get a lot of press, and now it's everyone's life. So apologies for that, but delighted to get to chat it all through.
Sloan, you had some questions. Let's hit them.
Yeah. So I guess going into this, you probably had like an idea of what it meant to be prepared for a pandemic. And I wonder like how that sort of changed seeing one actually unfold.
Yeah. No, it's kind of interesting when an abstract thing becomes kind of visceral reality. So I think like one thing this event shows us really powerfully is that pandemics are not a health system event. Oftentimes people think about them just from a preparedness standpoint in terms of, hospital beds and masks and gowns, and those are absolutely appropriate, important, critical things. But when these events hit, they engulf the whole of society. So preparedness means everything from, preparedness within educational institutions to restructure the way schooling works. Of course, logistics, supply chains, airports, kind of every bit of the fabric of society gets stressed by these events. And so we've thought for a long time that that's the right way to think about preparedness. We built some preparedness metrics that have that kind of whole society framework. One thing that I, kind of have been thinking about but didn't pay quite enough attention to is really like societal preparedness and science literacy. It's obviously an important issue. We've seen its importance in, declining immunization rates for measles and other diseases, which are horrific. Like if only people knew and could get their act together to really make sure their kids got vaccinated. So, we've seen already some of the potential perils when citizens lose sight of the importance of the tools we've already got in hand. And we're seeing that now in this event too. So that's a dimension of preparedness that I think, this country and others will need to get on top of in a big way when the dust settles on this event.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears. But like, so, the next thing is like kind of, if you think about like the projections that, we've been hearing for like when this whole thing will be resolved, they seem to kind of revolve around a pretty rosy forecast for when we're going to get a vaccine for the coronavirus, right? Like the president keeps saying 12 to 18 months. And, I don't think we have an HIV vaccine yet. That's been more than 12 to 18 months. Like what sort of error bars do you see around that forecast?
Big. So, 12 to 18 is this, it could be the way this shakes out. I hope so. I'll take as much bleach as I need to take if that's what makes it happen. But, no, I think, the thing is like 18 months is contingent on everything kind of breaking in our direction, right? Like, good luck with vaccine candidates, and then, hustling a vaccine through clinical trials. And the kind of cruel irony of this event is that, this is our third coronavirus emergence event, epidemic of the 21st century. We had SARS, we had MERS, we had this. And so the good news is that, well, we have some candidates for these other coronavirus strains already kind of, in testing, and those might provide a scaffolding to work from. There's now an Oxford candidate that's evidently looking promising. I haven't seen the data. The kind of gut-wrenching dark cloud aspect of this is that, it's not like this wasn't on our radar. Like we could have been investing in building a serious vaccine pipeline for these diseases. It's at the top of the watch list, the viral watch list. So what the hell are we doing? Plenty of like good scientists working on this, but policymakers totally asleep at the wheel. So I think 12 to 18 months is a nice thing for them to say. I hope it's true. I'm not planning on it personally.
Ben, at one point you told me there was a kind of a probability every year that this type of an event was happen, and it wasn't huge, but it's surprisingly big. And when you deal with the kind of investors that we're focused on, which are kind of like, pension funds, sovereign funds taking 50, 75-year horizons, anything above, 0.25%, 0.5% a year becomes pretty meaningful. What is that percent that we could, we should have been modeling?
Yeah. Of course, I don't have this memorized. I should. The number keeps changing as the death rate goes up. So that's, the way we think about modeling this is kind of out of the natural NatCat framework, where we look at the kind of epidemiologic version of a 100-year flood or a 200-year flood. So what's the probability of an event kind of at this severity or worse? And the severity keeps getting worse, so the number keeps changing. I guess the thing I would say is that these events are vastly more likely to occur than people really appreciate. And if you think about, so my great aunt just turned 101. She was born, right after the 1918 flu kind of crested. That is, the high water mark for misery and suffering epidemiologically, like the worst human mortality event from a natural catastrophe, I believe, in history. And we've had, several flu pandemics since then, and, multiple coronavirus epidemics, now a pandemic. And we just, there's this World Bank piece on pandemics titled From Panic to Neglect. And the argument it makes is that as soon as these events are in the rearview mirror, we just forget. I think the important thing for, investors who are thinking long term should bear in mind is that we have this bias, but science and viruses don't, and they emerge periodically. And this will certainly not be the last. And it won't be the worst.
Amen. I mean, I think the reason I'm so interested in that question from like a higher level of how do we help big investors manage these types of exogenous, impacts to their portfolio is it's similar to other things like climate change. Like we can look at the probabilities, we can look at like, the past and make predictions about the implications, the hazards to the global economy and begin to run scenarios. And so, one of the things that I'm so focused on is how do we help investors change their decision-making so that they can have resilient portfolios. And that's really, Sloan, for your benefit, where Ben and I have been kind of riffing, going back before the COVID thing really took off, where we were, just starting to talk about, hey, how could we integrate some of these scenarios and signals into the decision-making of investors that have horizons over which we know more pandemics are coming. Even the Zika thing, it may have been a blip, but think if you were in the tourism industry, that was a huge hit.
Yeah, and like I mean, it seems like you can. There was that TED talk that Bill Gates did 6 or 7 years ago, where he was just like a flu-like pandemic taking off is a virtual certainty on a long enough horizon. But like I wonder, Ben, I had COVID-like symptoms about a month ago, and had a very kind of mild case, but was never tested, and I'm not counted in any statistics. I wonder, I assume that makes your job kind of hard because, if you're trying to actually figure out what's going on and, what kind of course these things are taking, and there's all these data blindnesses, how do you get around that?
Yeah, I mean, the data are the critical thing for sure. COVID is a sort of interesting one because we know there's this massive underreporting, and for all kinds of reasons, right? Not enough tests, and then in some countries, not enough political will to pull it together to report what's going on. We have tremendous uncertainty about the death rate, but if you make some assumptions about the death rate based on countries where there is lots of good reporting, you can kind of back out an estimated caseload from that because the deaths are a little bit more obvious. It won't necessarily be the case when we get into flu season. We're just coming out of it here. We kind of dodged that bullet, but where a differential diagnosis is possible, you can take a stab at it. So from a modeling standpoint, one of the problems we've got is that, the historical record is sparse and we're missing lots of outbreaks. I mean, now the scientific literature suggests that there's a lot more Ebola, activity than we previously understood, potentially multiple small events per year or single infections or clusters potentially occurring. We don't know because reporting is sparse. So, we got to make assumptions and we have to, work from what is biologically and sociologically plausible to build the models that we do. But we think it's feasible and important, work to carry forward. So, I will happily spam you or any listener with papers on this topic. Send me some bleach. We'll make it a deal.
Oh yeah, no problem. We can send you our proprietary portable alpha formula that
Oh yeah, I'll have to explain that to you later, Ben.
I'm intrigued.
Oh yeah. Hey, I'm going to do one more question, then Sloan's going to do one more. So my question is markets. I'm fond of the classic Keynes quote, which is markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay sane, caring for children and doing your job at the same time, or something like that. I don't know it was something like that. My brain is all right. But look, I mean, we're only 13% or something off the highs, which were the highest highs in the history of stock markets. If you're looking at your models and thinking about, I'm not asking you to make economic predictions or even, recommendations to buy or sell. But, if you're looking at these markets thinking this is one of the greatest months we've had, April was one of the greatest months we've had in 20 years in terms of stock markets. That's a fact now that April's over. Is this irrational? Is Keynes right that this irrationality can go on for a long time until we're no longer solvent? Or, what is your thinking if you have a thought about the markets? And I know I'm asking you questions I didn't tell you I was going to ask.
Those are always really good ones. I think Keynes is always right? I feel like, or mostly often right. I think that the markets, they're doing something right and something wrong. The thing they've probably got right is that some companies are going to come out of this tremendously strengthened. Like there's some companies whose business models, just do really well in a world where people are, not moving around a lot and need things delivered. And so in some sense, some really big, strong players like Amazon will continue to get stronger at the expense of, probably the kind of Main Street economy. And I'm not saying anything terribly interesting when I say that, but it seems like it's definitely the case. But I think the markets probably don't fully appreciate the fact that they're kind of like looking for any good news, and the fact that the Treasury seems willing to, pump and Fed to just like dump liquidity into the market makes them feel good. We're going to be doing this, potentially for the next year or more. And the kind of net effect of the like marathon of COVID misery, joblessness, reluctance to be in social spaces, like the amount of sand in the gears of the economy that's going to produce, I think will really start to punish companies over the medium term. And so my own kind of thinking is that the market is like way frothily exuberant, way too frothily exuberant, given the real reality that's hitting people. It's going to take some time for it to settle in. But when it does, it's going to hurt. And, it would be nice if that weren't true, but this doesn't seem like a V-shaped event to me at all. It seems like an L-shaped event, if anything.
I guess one potential catalyst for that, here in New York, case counts are leveling out. We just sent the, USS Comfort back to base, so we don't need that big hospital ship that was hanging around for a little while. But 21 out of 50 states still have growing case count numbers. And those tend to be like here in New York, we have arguably the best healthcare system in the world. Bar none. The Upper East Side is just one giant hospital. But of the 21 to 50 states, they have older populations, worse healthcare systems, and worse pre-existing health. And they're signaling that they won't really collaborate with each other. Have you seen any estimates of what that lack of cooperation could cost?
We're generating some. We're not done yet, so I unfortunately can't throw you numbers. But I can say that I think that's like a time bomb waiting to go off, right? Some of those states have, as you say, like older populations, a lot of pre-existing conditions, worse health systems, more inequality, a whole lot of structural barriers, people getting the care they need. It's potentially a nightmare. And if they're not kind of cooperating, and if they're not implementing social distancing measures in a serious way, they're going to get hit really hard. So I think, there's the human and the kind of human dimension of that, which is just a lot of suffering, which we could avert. And then there will be the economic consequences in terms of joblessness. These are places that many of them were states where the economy wasn't great in the first place. So, so I worry a lot about that. And I think the other issue for New York and for California, where I live, and a lot of other places, is that we can be successful in round one, but until we've got a vaccine or, really good therapeutics, or herd immunity, this thing can come roaring back in a hurry. And we've seen that in a couple of countries already that were initially successful, that, you kind of like take your foot off the brakes by relaxing social distancing or, other measures. And unless you've got incredibly acute, biosurveillance, public health surveillance, you could be in a world of pain really quickly. So, my worry personally is like not wave one, but wave two. And then, so there's again, like the health dimension of that, but also the economic dimension. Like just when we get used to kind of coming out of doors from social distancing, in the fall, this thing could be back. And as a society and, as an economy, I don't think we're remotely prepared for that kind of endurance race. So it's so depressing. Let me give you good news.
No.
The good news, that was like the biggest joy kill interview ever. The good news is that, like, we will get through this. Like, we all had ancestors who lived through 1918. Like, that was a nasty virus, and they made it. And people live in really desperate circumstances, and they make it through events like this. We're going to make it. The question I'm asking myself is, like, how do we build? And my friends in the climate community, like you guys, like you're on this issue. How do we harness attention in a productive way to build a better tomorrow? Like, this event should be a wake up call that, like, this kind of virus is coming for us. It's going to come for us again, something like this in the future. How do we pull our shit together so that we are remotely prepared for next time? I hope that's the conversation we're having in 2022 over a nice round of not bleach cocktail. I'll see you there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll
don't drink bleach.
Talking about how to deal with the threat of Godzilla or whatever. Whatever happens next year, it's gonna be worse.
Ben, on that note, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you
for joining and taking a bit of time with us. That was really enlightening.
And for giving us the good news at the end to cheer us all up.
The least I could do. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you guys around.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That was awesome. I love just if you just permit me, like, a 90 second riff here. Go for it. The harnessing the moment to build a new tomorrow. To me, that's like that's what we do with crises in, like, the pension world. These organizations are so bad at innovating that it takes these mega crises to build new ways of investing. So, like, in 2001, 2003, when the internet bubble burst, the pension funds all had this realization, which seems totally obvious to every, sentient being, that they should think about their liabilities when they invest their assets. But prior to that, they didn't. They didn't think about the destination on their map when they set out, right? They just were like, oh, Chicago tells me that markets are efficient, and here's a 60-40 portfolio, and off we go. And so coming out of 2003, we ended up with something called liability-driven investing, which has now taken off, and every single asset management firm will have that type of a product. The GFC, we had this massive crisis. Again, all the pension funds were like, oh my gosh, we thought we had diversification because we had different product names. But it turns out that you need diversification across risks, which again is quite a simple concept. Like, clearly there are different risks in the economy, and those risks will affect products differently. But in the GFC, the pension funds had all these products, but they all went the same direction. And so there was correlation across all of them. And coming out, we had risk factor based asset allocation and a whole bunch of other innovations around how we manage risk. This crisis will do something. In my mind, I think, if I had to bet, I'd say this is the crisis that makes ESG not only commercial, but, like, highly relevant. That if you're a long-term investor taking a 50-year view, you have to see ESG as an indication of future risk. These may be tail risks, but, like, they clearly can be pertinent. And so, if 2001 was LDI and 2008 was factor-based asset allocations, I think this next one is integration of ESG. And that would be awesome for the world if that actually came to pass.
Yeah. I mean, another weird side effect of this too might be, like, so the global financial crisis was one of these weird crises where some rich people lost it all, right?
Yeah.
But if you were not, kind of totally screwed, you had a stable income or whatever, you could still continue living a pretty solid life, right?
Yeah.
This is the first crisis that we've had maybe since the Great Depression where we're actually all in it together, right? Like, there is no party that you can go to no matter how much money you have.
Yeah.
Like, you can hang out by yourself on your yacht in the Caribbean or something.
Yeah. Do you know what's funny? Our last podcast, my son pulled it up today because I was saying we were going to do this, and Henry was like, when am I going to be on the podcast? And I was like, next week. and we'll give him something to talk about. It'll be hilarious. But he's a 9-year-old, by the way, for everybody. And so he pulled it up, and we were talking about the blackouts.
Yeah.
So like here in California, this is the second totally weird event in the last 12 months. We had 4 days of no power. You know, like the whole coast here was like completely blacked out because of forest fire risk, another environmental risk. And so, you know, we'll look back on this 50 years from now and be like, that was nuts, or that was the beginning of the bullshit. You know, hopefully that was nuts is where it goes. But yeah, it feels like we keep stacking up these like really bizarre things.
Well, yeah, and I mean, for like in the lead up to this crisis, I was working on this like big paper on ESG as like a conference proceedings thing that, of course, now like lands with a thud, right? Like, you know, but
just
like
add
all of the
pandemic to your ESG and P.
Well, what was so weird about it actually is like a lot of the consensus forecasts for what higher climate means. Like you'll see people going like there will be a greater risk of pandemics, will be more susceptible to, you know, it's
mosquito-borne
like
illness
talking point, you know, inside of it. And, you know, okay, so we've gotten that part.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, I mean,
fascinating.
Right, that's enough of us being miserable.
What's next on the agenda?
That's the new Dear Ashby horn.
I love it. I much appreciate that one. That's light, and you know, just raises my soul a little bit. You know, feels good.
Yeah, we've still got the rap air horn hanging around for some point later. But you know but so Dear Ashby, dear listener, is the portion where we ask the one and only Dr. Ashby Monk the questions that you have written into us with. And by writing into us, you have either slid into one of our DMs on Twitter or emailed freemoneypod@gmail.com and you know, asked a question. And if it was good, and sometimes even if it isn't, we'll ask them in a segment. So the first one I have is, if states do wind up declaring bankruptcy due to the coronavirus, what would happen to state pensions?
Great question. So this question, when I saw you mention that, kind of took me back to my PhD, which was I had a flashback. You know, my PhD was on how pension obligations were managed by corporations that were, you know, we used to call them legacy costs. So corporations that were large manufacturing firms, you know, in the Rust Belt, you know, steel manufacturing, things like that, how those companies manage their defined benefit pension plans. And in many cases, it was bankruptcy. Going back to 1976, we set up this organization in the U.S. called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation to like facilitate a bankruptcy of a company with a pension to ensure that the pension still got paid. And there's been about 140 or so thousand companies that have been managed through that termination process at the PBGC. So this notion that bankruptcy is a means of changing the pension promise is not lost on the politicians in DC who floated this as a way of dealing with these insane benefit and entitlement costs. You know, I think it was Mitch McConnell who was like, we're going to let them go bankrupt.
Cocaine Mitch.
Cocaine. Moscow Mitch, you call him cocaine, I call him Moscow. And so, you know, it's not, we're all looking at the states right now wondering what the hell are we going to do with these liabilities? I mean, I think it was, we just saw a report in P&I, Pensions and Investments, yesterday that said pension liabilities are the underfunding level of pension liabilities is the worst it's been in 30 years. And we've been trying to put these plans on a better trajectory over the last 10 years. And so the fact that we're back in the worst case is really troubling. And like I think we've said before in the podcast, the only way that you can solve this from being a massive political and economic crisis and social crisis for the people who are going to rely on the pensions is contribute more money to the plans, get higher investment performance, or cut benefits. And so what you're seeing is people thinking, well, gosh, this crisis has gotten so bad. Maybe this is an opportunity to push some states into a bankruptcy and then potentially renegotiate these pension promises, as we have done with all these companies that went bankrupt that had these kind of cradle to the grave, what we used to call Cadillac pension plans. But the problem is states aren't companies. As best I know, they don't go bankrupt. They just default. And so it's not the same like legal code as far as I know. I would need to like dig into a little bit more to understand what is the process. But there's a process for companies in going bankrupt, and that's partly what the PBGC was set up to manage. That termination process of a pension plan as part of the legal proceeding of bankruptcy. And the PBGC today, just for people's curiosity, they don't pay the full benefit. That's partly why you're seeing some of the writer wing folks in Congress thinking this is a good option. I can remember when the Delta pilots lost their pensions to the PBGC. Many of them saw their pension go from, $120K a year till they die down to $43,000 a year till they die. That's
wow.
If you had bought a house in Florida, I don't know what you did, right? But
you're screwed.
You can't afford it anymore. And so that was a huge issue for a lot of pilots who had, you could call that like a ridiculously big pension, but like that was the deal they operated under, and probably, flew 18-hour shifts and all this stuff thinking, all right, this is my deal. Yeah. And then the deal changes. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of the talk about state bankruptcy as a means of renegotiating. I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah. And I guess, I wrote something about the PBGC like 2-ish years ago, and it was already coming near to like a funding problem. Yeah. Like there's something, before there was a crisis, right? We were already running pretty close to the red line.
Well, there's a moral hazard, right?
Exactly.
And that's an insurance concept where the people who need the insurance really need the insurance. And so they're going to use the insurance. And so there's no premium you can charge the people who really need it that covers the cost. Yep. Especially when it means you start increasing the premium, and then the people who stay in the program are the people who really need it.
Yep.
So it's this vicious cycle, and that's what we were seeing with the PBGC. And so this has really led to the demise of the corporate pension plan, right? Because those insurance premiums make it very expensive, And so now we're stuck with defined contribution pension plans everywhere, which is basically saying to all of you out there listening, deal with your own retirement. We're not going to help you. And oh, by the way, there is no PBGC for defined contribution pension plans. You're on your own.
Yep. Yeah, you should have made better investments if you lost money.
Basically, like, why aren't you listening to that podcast with Sloan and Ashby, right?
Yeah, like, why aren't you paying $3,000 a year for my investment newsletter?
And our portable alpha.
Exactly.
Now with bleach.
It's with extra bleach. All right.
Next question.
What have you started doing during lockdown that you plan to continue if life returns to normal?
2 things: push-ups and gardening. And I will continue to do those things. Push-ups. I know. I was never to push. In fact, my kids, recently were kind of telling me that I was. Have you seen that movie Captain America, Sloan?
Oh yeah,
Steve Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids were like, "Dad, you're like Captain America." Before he had that crazy treatment.
Oh, gotcha. I was like, wow, that's they seem to know you very well.
When they started telling me what they thought I was like, oh yeah, go on. And then I was like, oh. Before the treatment that made him a superstar. And so when I heard that I was the Steve Rogers pre-treatment, I was like, screw this. Quarantine is like jail. You just hang out nowhere. You pump iron. And so I started doing push-ups. And so when on my first session, I could do like 7. And last Saturday, I did 37 in a row.
Whoa.
I know. So that's a big thing. And then the other thing for me is gardening. My mom and dad are huge gardeners, and I always was like, who's got time to garden? But I have, we live on a hill in Los Gatos, so we're kind of up away from town, which means we have a little bit more space than the average Bay Area person. And I've been planting fruit trees. I've planted 15 fruit trees, so I'm ready to live off the land. When this never, when the vaccine never comes, we'll just be picking pomegranates and jujubes, because those are the drought resistant trees that we planted. Because I didn't trust myself to actually water the trees.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, like, I've been doing very much the same thing. I've got about 15 pineapple tomato plants that I've been growing.
Oh,
from
wow.
seed.
Cool.
And yeah, they grow these, like, the individual tomatoes that they grow are larger than 1 pound. So they like literally are the size of a pineapple.
That is amazing. I could imagine like slicing those and getting them on a grill or something.
Yeah, exactly, like a steak.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take those. Tomatoes actually grow really well upside down. So I'm going to you can make like a bucket, cut a hole in the bottom of it, and put the thing through it.
That's awesome.
And I'm going to turn those into my curtains. And I also have a bunch of jalapenos growing. So I do
too. I've got jalapenos growing. The craziest thing on earth, which I encourage you to try, if you have a garlic in your fridge that's like a little bit old, shove it in dirt. Yep. And like 4 days from now, you'll have like this giant stalk growing out of the ground.
Hell yeah.
My kids and I have been like literally just taking seeds out of stuff we eat and shoving it in the ground.
Yep.
And we found an old pumpkin, I don't know, beginning of quarantine, that like had been lurking around the house since November. It was not all, it was a small one, so it kept its form.
Sounds pretty gross.
Yeah, I know, it kept its form. Don't picture like a jack-o'-lantern or something. And we planted a bunch of pumpkin seeds, and like, I think we're growing like 18 pumpkin plants now. I'm going to like open up a pumpkin patch for the neighbors.
Hey, it's like we're getting back into these like good old fashioned folksy habits that our forebears used to, partake of.
And I will do that. I will keep doing this post quarantine. It's meaningful. Like it just feels good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I've got another like 10 or 15 plants that I didn't really talk about growing right now.
Awesome.
That just make me feel super happy. All right, the last question.
All right.
This is the politics one, so to speak. So because of the pandemic, lots of Americans are making more in unemployment benefits than they typically make in income. Like the Wall Street Journal did a piece where like they looked at like the state level, like median incomes. And the monthly unemployment benefit plus the $600 for like more than half of the state I think it was like 22, 25 states, where that combination was like substantially more, like 70% more than the median income.
Yeah.
And so how should we be thinking about it? Like,
how should we think about it?
Because I guess the journal's reporting kind of had the unstated premise that it's bad.
Well, I mean, let's think about it. Like, there's a couple of components here. The first component is it's clearly a disincentive to go out and find a new job if you're making more money without having a
Absolutely.
job. Okay. Absolutely. So like we can all agree that like if you're making a bunch more money not having a job, you're going to be like, I don't want a job until that goes away. So as a dynamic for like encouraging economic growth, no, like I imagine that the people who designed this weren't thinking this is going to be a huge catalyst for economic growth. They might have been thinking this will lead to spending, which will lead to, more job creation or something. But actually the way I think about it is like, earning more in unemployment is a very powerful incentive to fucking sit at home and respect the shelter in place order that we need to flatten and ultimately crush the curve. Stay home, smoke weed, and do not go out and try to find a job. We heard Ben. We're already, he's like, this is going to keep coming. We don't want to take the foot off the accelerator or brake or whichever one we're doing, whichever analogy. But like, as of this podcast, I think we're near 65,000 dead.
Yep.
The latest predictions are that we're going to go past 100,000. If we take the foot off the brakes, does that go out to 250,000? It's not that long ago that even our president, who, you know, is a bit of a interesting character, said we could have 2 million people dead. You know, 2 million Americans dead. Okay, so if we have an incentive that actually pushes people to stay home and avoid that worst outcome, awesome. Yeah. And when we get through this period and we need to get people back to work, well, maybe there's a way for us to do, you know, the welfare to work type programs we saw under Clinton and get people incentivized to get back to work. But I'm not, you know, I don't agree with the Wall Street Journal's take that this is all bad.
Yeah, and like I kind of, you know, it makes me think of the Star Trek economy a little bit. Like one of the things I've been doing to stay sane is watching a lot of Trek, right? Awesome. Which I had never really hung out with, you know, beforehand, and now I've seen all of it.
No way.
All of the series, not all of the episodes, but all of the series.
Yeah.
And you know, there's one episode in like Star Trek: The Next Generation where they catch like a 1980s stockbroker who had frozen himself. You know, like cryogenically because he had some illness.
Oh my gosh.
Like
it's amazing.
Know, ejected himself into space. And you know, his illness is now easy to cure. They cure it. They wake him up and he's like, I gotta call my broker. You know, like, get me on the phone. I gotta figure out how much money I have. You know, Captain Picard, you don't understand. I'm very wealthy. And, you know, and Picard is like, you don't understand. Like what you're talking about wealth is literally meaningless to me.
Like that's gone as a concept.
Yeah. So like we don't do that. Like the idea of accumulating possessions for their own sake is just dead. You know, like as is the idea of starving because you don't have work.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
You know, so like I think it's really, you know, that's the kind of policy that if Barack Obama had put it into place, you know, you would have like, you know, people in those 3-sided hats, like camping out in front of the capitals, you know, in even stupider ways than you currently have.
Yeah.
But because it's being, you know, it's like essentially like we've adopted socialism and the people who did it were the Republicans.
I know. Yeah.
You know, which is like, I mean, I think that's a coup.
I know. Eminent domain, lack of, you know, using the Defense Powers Act. Stay-at-home orders, taking your freedom.
$4 trillion of money printing.
Yeah, printing money. You know, it's like the right wing has turned into left wing. But, you know, life is interesting. Life is interesting.
I mean, you just gotta, that's the only way to express yourself these days.
Oh, I just am so glad season 2 is going again. And here we go.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So much fun stuff to talk about for the next 12 episodes.
Yeah.
Henry was like, how many episodes do you guys do a season? I was like, we barely realized we're in seasons. We just took a long break.
Well, I mean, if there's, you know, if coronavirus shuts down ski season next year, we might just be able to keep going.
Keep going.
Like this.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. We love you very much. And tune in for the next one.
Bye.
I'm looking like